So I've become allergic to introductions. And the main reason is last year I was doing a talk for University College Hospital in London. And whoever was introducing me said, welcome to cohort 3 of this program. We've been running this for 3 years, and we've been using Keith's work for 3 years. But he didn't speak to cohort 1 or cohort 2 because we thought he was dead. Apparently he's not. Keith. So I responded with my favorite line from an American funeral parlor, and the strap line is, "You die, we do the rest." Okay, so wicked problems, the role of leadership. I want you to think about this as I'm going through this. Just think about which work problem is driving you nuts. I should warn you in advance that I speak very quickly, even for native English speakers. This is really slow for me. I speak very quickly, and the longer it goes on, the quicker I get. If you can't keep up, you need to listen quicker. So I'm going to start with this. This is a graph from one of Richard Pascal's books. It looks at change programs across time. This is from 1950 to 1995, but you can go to 2014 in the ceiling. So we've got things like diversification, decentralization, delayering, management by walking about, benchmarking, and so on and so forth. So there are several things that are worth thinking about here. The first thing to consider is how difficult change was in the 1950s, because we only had 3 ways to help you change. Looking around the room, 1 or 2 of you will remember the 1950s. Once we get past 1960, it gets easier and easier and easier because of all the work that we've done. All you have to do is read it. Thank you. Good afternoon and good luck. So several things fall out of this. The second thing that falls out of this is this. There's a niche market for books called The First 90 Days or The First 100 Days. And the implication behind these books is that you won't have very long to make a big impression on your new part of the organization because somebody will move you along quite quickly. So you need to make a big impression really quickly. This is the equivalent of what animals do when they move into a new territory. They scent it in a particular kind of way. This is what new bosses do. They wee all over the furniture. To be able to say, I have been here, you will remember me. You don't want to be not remembered. I'm thinking about writing a book called The First 10 Seconds. Shouldn't take me very long to write. Which is the reason I've come here, really, is to sell you my books. It's important to be transparent and authentic and all that stuff. So I currently sell the cheapest and the most expensive books on leadership. The cheapest is £6.50, and the most expensive is £650. That's a 4-volume edited set. The expensive set is much better value than the cheap one. If you buy my books but don't read them, we both benefit. Next thing that happens is this desperate attempt by organizations to restructure themselves all the time. This is the British Health Service. We restructure the 5th largest organization in the entire world every year. Nobody knows why. I think it's part of the we need to be seen to be doing something approach to life. Now, I'm sure you don't know much about the British Health Service, so let me persuade you that the 2006 structure is exactly the same as the 82 structure. We went all the way around this to get back to where we were in the first place, and then we changed it again. Normally, restructuring doesn't damage an organization because the people that work in the organization don't actually care what the structure is. They just come in, do the work, and go home again. I'm not sure about the current restructuring of the British Health Service. If I was you, I wouldn't go to the UK for a while. This is my own organization at Warwick Business School. As you can see, we've had 6 name changes in my department in 4.5 years. That coincides with 6 new bosses. That's just a coincidence. This is my favorite one. In 2013, Organization and International Human Resource Management. That lasted for 1 day. It's a great day. Some of us got to Heathrow Airport because we were international. And then we were called back because the boss had resigned and we got a new boss and a new name. I don't know what it is yet. I haven't checked in today, so I have no idea whether I'm still here or not. Or these are pieces of legislation that happen to affect the police in England and Wales, but it actually wouldn't matter which organisation or which country you lived in. There is some very intelligent person currently designing a new piece of legislation to make your life so much easier. We have so much criminal legislation now that there's no crime left in the UK. It's a crime-free zone. Everything is banned. Or these are personnel changes to the British Ministry of Defence. But again, it wouldn't actually matter which country or which organisation you work for. At the top, there is usually a significant personnel churn. So between 1964 and 2009, when I got bored doing this, we have had 19 political heads, 20 chiefs of the overall group, 18 chiefs of the army, 18 chiefs of the navy, only 15 chiefs of the Air Force. So 3 members of the Air Force have missed out on significant pension rights because the Air Force haven't worked out what the game is yet. 90 chiefs in 45 years, that's about 1 every 6 months changes. It takes about 20 years to get an aircraft carrier from somebody's head to the water. In our case, it takes another 3 years to get any aircraft on top because we forgot to order them. But that isn't the important point. The important point is to think about how difficult it is to get long-term change in, given the amount of change you have to cope with on a daily basis. I'm sometimes surprised that anybody gets any work done, given the amount of change you have to cope with on a daily basis. So we end up doing this, drowning in the waves of change. This is the only rational response I've ever come across. Bohica, bend over, here it comes again. So Bohica is worth thinking about if you find yourself lost on one of these things. Let's just pretend it's 1986, when I think is when zero-based budgeting comes in, and you can't quite get your head round zero-based budgeting. You know you have at most 12 months to put up with this nonsense because the program and the person leading it will have gone within 12 months. There will be a new program and a new lead. So actually, burying your head in the sand is not necessarily an irrational response. Now, a few years ago, I had a couple of my PhD students looking at change literature independently of each other, and they both came to the same conclusion, that most of it says something like this: top 10 commandments. A need to change, a viable alternative, change agents in place, sponsorship from above, realistic scale, integrated transition, symbolic end, plan for resistance, constant advocacy, and a locally owned benefits plan. So the strange thing about this list is that, first of all, it makes sense. These are the kinds of things that you think you probably should be doing. Secondly, it captures just about everything that we've just looked at. Almost all those things that we've just looked at say something like this list. If you know anything about this area, Kotter is the guru of change management. Anyone know how many things Kotter's got on his list? He has 8. We have 10. That's a 25% improvement for no extra cost. That's how easy it is to get more out of less. Despite this, we don't seem to be able to make change work. So something like 3/4 of all change programs fail in their own terms. So when you ask people, what were you trying to do? And did you achieve what you were trying to do? Most people say, no, we failed, again, which is strange because we know what to do. So how can we explain this massive failure rate of change? This is the reason. So, the first time last year, in one of my undergraduate lectures, somebody said, I don't understand why she threw the monitor on the floor. You are young, aren't you? Let me tell you about a typewriter. There's a saying which goes with this, an English saying, and the English saying is, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. This is the wrong saying. The more appropriate saying is, you cannot teach an old dog to forget the old tricks. It's not actually a learning problem, it's a forgetting problem. So many of the ideas that you've got to change your organization are really good ideas, but they sit on top of organizational old tricks. They sit on top of people. They sit on top of organizational politics. That's what screws up your brilliant idea. So I think about how we might get around this. So I'm going to suggest maybe we have different kinds of problems and different kinds of decision styles that go with the problem. Quite often when you make something work, you have a universal model of change in your head and you keep using the same model over and over again and it doesn't work second or third time. It might be because it's a different kind of problem. Before I explain this, let me give you 2 health warnings. The first health warning is this is a heuristic. This is a sense-making activity. I'm trying to reduce complexity down to 3. I recognize there are a million different kinds of problems and a million different kinds of decision styles, but my little head cannot cope with numbers beyond 3. Everything in my house and my life is threefold. I have 3 grandchildren, 3 children, and 1 wife. Second health warning, I might not use these words in ways that may be familiar to you. So, for example, my definition of leadership might be different from yours. You need to bear that in mind as I go through this. So I'm going to suggest we have critical problems for commanders, tame problems for management, and wicked problems for leadership. These are decision styles. They're not individuals. So we'll start with critical problems in the land of the commander. First thing to think about is they're portrayed as a self-evident crisis. So if people don't believe it's a crisis, then you can't command them. That's the situation between what they believe to be happening and what you can do with them. Secondly, there's general uncertainty. The reason we have a crisis is because most people don't know what to do. If they knew what to do, there wouldn't be a crisis. So it's the absence of standard operating procedures generates the crisis. You as the commander have to know what to do. You have to have the answer in your head. Otherwise, you're a failed commander. 3, there's no time for discussion or dissent, so we're not worrying here about health and safety nonsense or management procedures. If you don't do what I'm going to tell you, you're going to lose your life or lose your job. We're in those kinds of situations. Because of the first 3, you can coerce people. As long as they think there is a crisis, you are the commander with the answer in your head, and you're doing it for the collective good. If they thought you were commanding them for your private gain, they might try and resist you. So I'm associating those with command, and many organizations are run by commanders. Not just uniformed organizations, but lots of organizations are run by commanders. People who are very decisive. People who always seem to know what to do. Never panic. They're quite often decisively wrong, but at least they're decisive. You do know you're going in the wrong direction. There's no anxiety about this. You are going in the wrong direction. So some images of commanders here. Russell Crowe, Master and Commander. The late Mrs. Thatcher, archetypal British political commander. When she was in control of the country, we were always in a crisis. Quite worked out whether she was causing them or responding to them, but we were always in a crisis. This is Mr. Bush, dressed as an American Air Force officer. This is a giveaway for civilians who like to dress in military uniform now and again. I think in his head he thought of himself as a commander, a very decisive person, for whom the world's either black or it's white. It's never grey. This is my eldest daughter, Katie. She's in the police. I'll come back to her in a minute. So 3 kinds of crisis. We have a financial crisis, of course. I put those photos up about 4 years ago, thinking they might be with us for about 6 months. I think they might outlive me. Second kind of crisis is this one. This is Edgware Road Station. This is an underground station in London, when one of the bombs went off in 2005. When that bomb went off there, I was in the next station. I was in Paddington Station. And so a bomb goes off here, power failed in Paddington Station, and somebody in the station said, there's a power failure in this station. Make your way to a different station. So I did. I walked to Edgware Road. It took me about 7 minutes. When I got there, none of these emergency people are here, but there's a similar number of commuters gathered around the entrance. No one's going in and no one's coming out. There's just smoke coming out. I'm British, so obviously I join the back of the queue. I'm about here. Now wondering how I'm going to get to my conference, because the first station doesn't have any power and the second one is on fire. No one is talking about bombs or terrorism. My phone doesn't work, so I get my paper map out to see which is the next station I need to walk to. And as I look at the map, somebody runs up in this direction, past this car, towards the back of the group, which is blocking the entrance, and shouted at the group, "Get out of the way!" Now, when that normally happens on the street, I look around and see how big the person is who's told me to get out of the way before I make a decision about whether I am going to get out of the way. And I turned around, it's actually an ambulance driver. with 2 big medical bags running at the back of the group, which is blocking the entrance. When he gets to the back, which is me about here, he doesn't put the bags down and whisper in my ear, "Excuse me, sir, would you mind moving? There does seem to be a problem." He shouted very loudly right in my ear, "Get out the way!" And the second time he said it, everybody in the group heard him, turned around, saw what was going on, moved aside, and this man ran down the tube station. So self-evident crisis, general uncertainty, but not in his head. He is the commander with the answer. No time for discussion or dissent. He's not asking us to move. He's telling us to move. And because it's obviously a crisis, and he's obviously working for the public good, we allow him to coerce us. Not all crises are like these. Sometimes you get a domestic one. It takes me back to Katie, my eldest daughter. So 5 years ago, I was hosting the extended Grint family Christmas lunch. We had 22 people in my house on this day. And you know, at some point today, there is going to be a catastrophe. The question is, how long can you keep normality running for on Christmas Day? So we start eating lunch about 1 o'clock, and by 1:25, I have lost the will to live. And the main reason is my mother, who has been entertaining us with a 25-minute speech about her latest knee operation. I'm looking at my turkey leg thinking, I can't eat this now. Nor do I know how to get out of the situation. But luckily, I'm sitting by my father, who was in the army for 150 years. So he'll have met this scenario many times. He will know what to do. So I whispered to him, "Dad, can you shut her up?" He said to me much too loudly for my liking, "You're the host. You try shutting her up." I don't want to die by this woman's hand at this point in my life, so I don't do anything. I look at my turkey leg and I begin to pray to it. My prayers are answered about a minute later by Katie, my eldest daughter, who said to my mother, her grandmother, "Nanny?" My mother stopped mid-sentence and she said, "Yes, dear." And Katie said, "Get a grip." Luckily, she did. She stopped talking and we had quite a nice Christmas lunch. Self-evident crisis, general uncertainty, but not in Katie's head. She is the commander with the answer. No time for discussion or dissent. She doesn't lean over and whisper in my ear, "Dad, will it be all right if I abuse your mother? Otherwise, we are never going to get through this lunch." She just did it. And because it's for the public good, it's legitimate coercion. Commander's role, take the required decisive action. That is to provide the answer to the problem. So I want to capture that way of thinking about decision-making with this creature, albino elephant, a white elephant. In Thai culture, an albino elephant was treated as a god, omniscient, omnipotent. We treat white elephants as false gods. Look great, cost a fortune, don't do anything. Number 2 also comes from Thai culture, because if a white elephant was born, it was given by the Thai king to his least favored noble. And so expensive was it to feed that it would ruin the noble. So I'm going to suggest you do need to be number 1 sometimes, prepared to be godlike in your coercion of people if there's a crisis and you are the commander with the answer in your head and you're doing it for the collective good. But some of us think we're gods, and then we end up with number 2. Second category of decision-making and problems. These are tame problems. These are problems for management as a decision style, as I'm defining them. So tame problems are the equivalent of a puzzle. There's always a solution to a puzzle. That's why it's called a puzzle. There is always a solution to a tame problem if it is a tame problem. These are complicated, but they're not complex. So you can take them out of their context, fix them, put them back into the context. You haven't changed the context. You can't do that with a complex one that we'll look at in a minute. There will be a unilinear solution to each and every tame problem. There will be a standard operating procedure for every tame problem. So Rubik's Cube is a good example of a tame problem. There's a standard operating procedure for fixing it. If you know what it is, you can fix it quite quickly. It looks like this. If you don't know what it is, you will still fix it because it's fixable, but it will just take you some time. The problems that you probably solved before, and if you haven't, someone next to you will know how to solve them. And if they don't, there'll be a book which says, this is how you fix this problem. Just follow these procedures and you'll fix it like that, if it's a tame problem. So heart surgery is a good example of a tame medical problem. If you're a trained heart surgeon, in a contemporary hospital. It's a very complicated procedure, but the procedures work and most people survive heart surgery. If I'm doing your heart surgery, you don't have a tame problem, you have a critical problem, because I have no idea what I'm doing. So this tells you the categorization of the problem is subjective, not objective. It depends where you know and what you sit, what kind of a problem you're looking at. So heart surgery to a heart surgeon is tame, but to anybody else it isn't. Launching another new product, tame, do what you did last time. Relocating is a tame domestic problem. This is very stressful, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. If that's what it feels like, it'll be a tame problem. If it's about efficiency, if there's a tick list involved, it will almost certainly be a tame problem. So management's role is to engage the appropriate process to solve the tame problem. I want to capture that way of thinking about decision-making with this man, Frederick Taylor, father of scientific management, which he published in 1911. For Taylor, if you applied science properly, you can solve all the world's problems. I think you can solve all the world's tame problems through the appliance of science or standard operating procedures, but not all the world's problems are tame. Tame problem comes in, goes to the taming machine, solution comes out the other end. This is an example of assuming that education is a tame problem of efficiency and tick lists. So my wife's a primary school teacher. She teaches children who are in reception class, children who are 4 or 5 years old. This is the assessment scheme which she had in her classroom last year, since when she's had 4 other assessment schemes rolled in and rolled out again. This particular one divided her classroom into 7 cozy corners, and each cozy corner was associated with a tick list of items, about 35 items, and her job was to catch children doing these things. It was not to teach them, it was to catch them. So, for example, did they experience play and learning in a range of indoor and outdoor environments which stimulate wonder, imagination, excitement, and the disposition to learn? Tick. Did they make marks with a range of tools, preferably not on somebody else's face? Tick. At the end of the year, her job was to put all the ticks in a big book of ticks and give the big book of ticks back to the parents, who would be thrilled with the number of ticks their children had achieved in the big book of ticks, which is why she's resigned. Third category of problems. These are wicked problems. These are problems for leadership, as I'm defining it. These don't have simple solutions, and sometimes they don't have any solution. They're either novel, or they're recalcitrant. They're novel, they're new to you, and therefore you can't know what to do. This also implies that they might not be new to somebody else. Somebody else may have been here before. To them, what you think is a wicked problem, to them might be a tame problem. You can just swap places and they'll tell you what to do. But if nobody knows what to do, it might be a wicked problem. Or they're recalcitrant problems. You have had these problems over and over again, and you simply can't fix them. So the current version of terrorism that we face in the UK, for example, is different from the version we had in Northern Ireland, which we have more or less stabilized as opposed to have fixed. But you can tell how people categorize problems by listening to the words they use to describe them. Mr. Bush used to talk about terrorism in terms of the war on terror that we will win. When we've killed all the terrorists, there won't be any more terrorism. That will be it. If, on the other hand, you think terrorism is more like a policing problem that might always be with us, it might not be a tame problem with a solution. Or the recalcitrant. So we've had the health service in the UK, the National Health Service in the UK, since 1948. So it's not a new problem. It's an increasingly recalcitrant problem. We have an increasingly aging population with increasing long-term medical requirements. We have an increasing ability through science to intervene and prolong human life, and we have a decreasing financial base. So we have infinite demand and finite supply. I don't think we can fix the health service in the UK. I don't think any country can fix the health service unless it has an infinite budget. If it doesn't have an infinite budget, it has a finite budget. And at some point, you have to say to people, I know what's wrong with you, and I could, in theory, fix you, but I can't afford the fix, so you're not getting it. Sorry. This is a political decision. It's not a medical decision. I'm not even sure that we have an NHS. I think we have an NIS, the National Illness Service. We tend to fix people who are broken. We don't stop them from breaking. We wait till they break, and then we fix them. A broken leg is a good example of a tame medical problem for the National Illness Service. It's 3 or 5 weeks in plaster, doesn't cost us very much, and it almost always works. But I think that fits within the health service as a whole, which is probably a wicked problem. I'll come back to that in a minute. These are complex rather than complicated. You can't solve them in isolation, and when you try to, you very often generate other kinds of problems. So climate change is a contemporary wicked problem, and the first generation of biofuels was an attempt to tame that wicked problem. But what that did is take 25% of American agricultural land out of food production, led to food price increases, food shortages, without fixing climate change. This is typical. When you try and tame wicked problems, you very often generate other problems downstream that you weren't even thinking about when you began the taming process. I don't have stopping rules and never no definition of success, so crime will always be with us. I don't know any society which is large-scale or long-lived that doesn't have crime. So if your target is zero crime, you're wasting everybody's time. You can make crime better or worse, but you can't actually fix it. It seems to be part of the human condition. So the trick is to work out how you can manage it better rather than how you can pretend to fix it. Sometimes the solution precedes the problem analysis. This sounds a bit strange. I've got 3 grown-up children. When they were growing up, we had a big problem once, and I can remember saying, "Listen up, kids. This is the solution to this problem." And one of them said, "That isn't the problem." But not until you put the solution on the table do you flesh the problem out. And sometimes you have to work with a partial solution because you haven't quite worked out what the problem is. Symptoms of deep divisions, contradictory certitudes. People are absolutely certain in completely different directions about what to do about every wicked problem. What to do about public sector debt, what to do about crime, what to do about health, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, North Korea. People are absolutely certain in completely different directions. Don't have right and wrong solutions, just better or worse development. So if you think Afghanistan was a tame problem like Iraq was, then you can do what we did in Iraq, which is to flood the place with troops, you kill all the bad guys, you pull the troops out, and you leave a stable, free, democratic, liberal society. If, on the other hand, it didn't quite work out like that, and if Iraq is not the same as Afghanistan, then there might not be a solution to Afghanistan. There might just be better or worse developments. That might be as good as it gets. So uncertainty and ambiguity are inevitable here. We don't like these. We tend to reward people who are good at removing uncertainty. But I'm going to suggest you cannot know what to do with a wicked problem. If you do, it isn't a wicked problem. Your job, therefore, is to get used to the uncertainty and learn to live with the ambiguity. This is what the English poet Keats calls negative capability. This is the ability not to make a decision, to stand back and to reflect on this. How long have I got before I need to make a decision? You might have 10 minutes, or 10 weeks, or 10 years. You should take this time, because if you get this decision wrong, we are all screwed forever. Let's stop being so decisive all the time. This is the opposite of positive capability, which is the land of the commander, when you need to be decisive and you need to do it now. You need to be able to do both. There's problems for leadership, not management. There's no known process. There's no point in you acting like a commander and being decisive because you can't know what to do. If you know what to do, it isn't a wicked problem. Since you don't know the answer, your job is to ask the right kinds of questions. But we tend to reward people who are good with answers, not questions. I can't tell you the number of times I've been into my boss's office and said, "Boss, I've got a problem." And my boss always says, "Keith, you always bring me problems. You have never brought me a solution." And I always say, "If I had a solution, boss, I wouldn't be in your office, would I?" I get sacked at the end of that conversation normally. Since you don't know the answer, your job is to ask the right kinds of questions and to engage in high levels of collaboration. There might be somebody in the room whom your wicked problem to them is tame because they have been here before. You can just swap places. But if nobody knows what to do, it might be a wicked problem. We need to start a conversation. recognizing that it might be as good as it gets to stop things getting any worse. Some very sharp minds have thought about why it is that our knowledge and experience does not help us with wicked problems and the equivalent. So Hegel, a German philosopher, has the owl of Minerva in some of his work, which only spread its wings at dusk. Only when the day is gone does the wisest creature we know of start working. In other words, sense-making is quite often retrospective. You're at work all day and you're so busy, you're on autopilot. You're not thinking about what you're doing. And it's not until you get home and take your shoes off and you think, what the hell was all that about? And retrospectively, you make sense of your day. It'll be the same on your deathbed. You'll be lying there thinking, what the hell was all that about? And retrospectively, you'll make sense of your life, which means that you will die happy. If you don't, give me a shout. We'll talk this through. Kierkegaard, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Walter Benjamin has the angel of history in some of his work, facing the past and blown backwards into the future. You've got all this experience and all this knowledge, but where you're about to go, it isn't going to help you very much because you're going somewhere different. And Coleridge, if men could learn from history what lessons it might teach us, but passion and party blind our eyes, and the light which experience gives us is a lantern on the stern, which shines only on the waves behind us. Let me give you two examples to clarify the relationship between tame and wicked problems. This is the first one. These are high jump records across time, between 1900 and 1996. The measurements is in inches. So between 1920 and 1952, the most popular technique is the Western roll, and you don't seem to be able to get beyond 80 inches using this technique. So if it's 1953 and you're thinking about winning the 1956 Olympic gold medal for the high jump, it doesn't actually matter how efficiently you train at the Western roll. If you want to win it, stop doing the Western roll. And it doesn't matter how good you are at visualizing the gold medal. If you want to win it, stop doing the Western roll. Now, many of us in the public sector in particular have been struggling with Western roll problems for the last few years. That's about how you get more out of less. There comes a point in time when you can't get more out of less. You have to get different out of less. You have to work out what you are prepared to sacrifice to enable you to do what you need to do. So the efficiency issue, this is a tame problem. Just happens to be the wrong problem. And the switch from this technique to this technique, that's a wicked problem. A second example. In 2008, we had 811,000 people in the UK in hospital with some kind of alcohol problem. Cost about £2.7 billion. In 2012, we had 1 million people in hospital, cost about £3 billion. That's an enormous cost to the public purse. This is a problem which is more significant for the English part of the health service than the other parts of the health service in the UK. But in the English part of the health service, we have tended to treat this as a tame problem of efficiency for the National Illness Service. So if I'm the chief exec of an acute hospital, it is in my interest to see as many drunks as I can on a Friday night and get them through my hospital as efficiently as possible. The more drunks I see and the more efficiently I get them through my hospital, the more rewards I get. I'm not interested in their health. I'm interested in their illness. If I was concerned for their health, my question would not be how do I get them through my hospital efficiently, but how do I stop them turning up on my doorstep in this terrible state. This has got nothing to do with hospital efficiency. This is a social problem for us all to wrestle with, which is why we don't, because it's too damn difficult. So what we end up doing is what we're good at, which are tame problems of efficiency. It just happens to be the wrong problem. So in the public sector generally, the last few years, we have been struggling with the efficiency of the supply side, how you get more out of less. I'm suggesting there comes a point in time when you can't get more out of less, you have to get different out of less. You have to start thinking about not how you just become efficient at the supply side, but how you manage to reduce demand. And you can see this in the UK context most clearly in this very famous Barnett graph of doom. So Barnet is a local authority in London. And the projections for the budget line for this particular local authority is that by 2022, there will be no money for anything except for children and adult services. That's it. There's no money for anything else. It's all gone. You cannot efficiently get your way out of this problem. You have to start thinking about how you manage to reduce supply, reduce demand, rather than just worry about the efficiency of the supply side. So in England, a few years ago, we had a series of experiments called Total Place, which is an attempt to map out on a local geographical area how much it costs to deliver a particular public service, and was there a better way of delivering the public service. And at Warwick, we were engaged in one with a local authority, trying to work out how much it cost to get a drunk off the streets of a local city and take them either to a police cell or a hospital bed. How much did that cost? And was there a better way of delivering that service? And very crudely, we reckoned it cost about £600 per person per night. And normally what we do on a Saturday when these people have sobered up, we say to them, thank you very much for your custom. We've really enjoyed having you. And we look forward to seeing you next Friday. And what we might say is, thank you very much for your custom. We've really enjoyed having you, and here is the bill. Now, there are several things wrapped up in this. The first thing to think about is this would not solve all those people's problems. Some people have mental health issues, and this would not solve those people's problems. Some people are very rich drunks, and it wouldn't solve their problem either. But the point about it is more important in terms of the symbolic aspect of wicked problems. You have to give the wicked problem back to the person with the problem. If they're not involved in the resolution of their own wicked problem, then you're never going to be able to fix it. I was talking about this in Australia last year, and somebody in the audience was from New South Wales Police and said they just started a similar experiment. And they were charging people 1,200 Australian dollars for a night in the cells for being drunk and disorderly. And I said, so how many people do you normally get? And he said, on a Friday, about 15. And they've only been doing it for 2 weeks. And on the first Friday, they got 12 people. And the second Friday, they got 3 people. So A, there's a lag in the learning when people think, how much this is actually going to cost me for a normal night out. And secondly, these 3 people will probably always be there, because you don't solve all these people's problems through a simple single resolution, because there usually isn't a simple single cause to any wicked problem. This is Peter Connolly, known as Baby P in England. He was killed by his mother and her partner and his brother. When he was killed, there were 2 responses from the authorities. The first response is a command response. And the command response basically says, find me someone to hang from a public lamppost to get the media off my back. I don't care who it is, just find me somebody. So this woman is sacked. The second response is a management response. And the management response says, this tragedy occurred for 2 different reasons. The wrong person was in charge, and she's hanging from a lamppost, and we didn't have a perfect process. Get me a perfect process to make sure this never happens again. And when it happens again, we'll do the same thing. We'll hang somebody else from a lamppost and we'll put some more process in. And we'll keep doing this on the assumption that what we're looking at is a tame problem of efficiency that can be fixed with a perfect process. But if it isn't, you will never fix it like this. We know historically that parents have always killed children. They always will. You can make it better or worse, but you can't actually stop it. The person most likely to kill you is your parent. Most of you will be safe at this point. The point about this is how organizations respond to these kinds of issues. And one way of capturing the response is whether they turn into hard shell or soft shell organizations, exogenous or endogenous organizations. So a hard shell organization is built on the assumption the way to prevent a catastrophe of whatever kind in your organization is to surround it with perfect processes to make sure nothing ever goes wrong. And a soft shell organization is based on the assumption that something always goes wrong. So it's not how do you prevent things from going wrong, it's how do you repair the damage when it inevitably goes wrong. You can see that probably best in James Reason's work on accidents, his famous Swiss cheese model. So your organization is top right and the catastrophe, however defined, is bottom left. And when something goes wrong, what you normally do is put a piece of process in to prevent it going down towards the catastrophe. But unless your process is perfect, there will be a hole in it, and the problem will seek the hole out and go through it. And then what you normally do is put some more process in, and you'll keep adding layers of process on the assumption eventually you will have a perfect process. But if you don't, you will not fix it like this. So a different way of thinking about this is whether, let's just assume the issue you're talking about is safety, whether safety is a consequence of perfect process, or whether safety is a consequence of individuals taking particular kinds of action. If it's the latter, if we have to think about how professionals use their discretion to flex the system, to repair the damage, and to limit too many catastrophes, that's a different way of assuming that the resolution of the problem is just a perfect process. If you're interested in the former, Sidney Decker's book, Just Culture, is probably the best introduction that I know of. So there are two things that fall out of this. This is the first thing that falls out, blame culture, or sweep it under the carpet school of leadership. You start top left. You've made a mistake. Will it show? No. Bury it. Problem avoided. You made a mistake. Will it show? Yes. Can you hide it? Yes. Conceal it before somebody else finds out. Problem avoided. Can you hide it? No. Can you blame somebody else? Yes. Get involved with your version of events. Problem avoided. Can you blame somebody else? No. Would admission damage your career? Yes. Sit tight. Hope the problem goes away. Problem avoided. So I've worked for 25 organizations in my life. I've looked a lot more than that. I don't know any organization that isn't brilliant at this. That's not actually true. There are no organizations that are brilliant at this, because organizations don't learn anything from this. Individuals learn how to bury errors, mistakes, and bad news. Organizations don't learn a thing. And the flip side of blame culture is Prozac leadership. Because the organization is usually so good at burying errors, mistakes, and bad news, the top doesn't actually know what is going on in the organization. So Prozac leadership, unremittingly positive approach from the top, encouraging leaders to believe their own propaganda, discouraging people from raising problems. The only ones that actually believe the corporate messages are the corporate leaders, which is why they're always so surprised when things go wrong. Why didn't you tell me stuff was going wrong? Well, if you remember, boss, the last time someone told you something was going wrong, you sacked them. That was 2 years ago, and since then, nothing seems to have gone wrong. So here are some examples of what I think might be Prozac leadership from our military leaders in Afghanistan. These are all quotes from our military leaders there. In 2004, General Barno said, without question, 2004 will be a decisive year. General Abu Zaid, 2005 will be a decisive year. Richards, 2006 will be the crunch year for the Taliban. Shampoo, 2008 will be a decisive year. McChrystal, 2009, the Taliban no longer have the initiative. We're knee-deep in the decisive year. Miliband, 2010 will be a decisive year. And Westerwelle, 2011 will be a decisive year. I don't know what happened to 2012 or 13. I thought we were on the edge of a victory, but clearly we weren't. Just goes to show how little I know about Afghanistan compared to these people. There's something in all of this about the importance of personal responsibility I want you to think about, because this is the issue at the heart of wicked problems, is how you get people to take personal responsibility for whatever the problem is. So I live in Oxfordshire, in the middle of the country, at the bottom of a valley. And if you've ever been to England when the snow comes, the place stops in about 3 minutes. And we had 3 days of snow forecast, but when I got into my car, there had been no snow. But as I turned my engine on, a very large snowflake settled in my line of vision right in front of me. And I thought I heard health and safety ring me up and say, Keith, you can't drive to work with a snowflake that big on your windscreen. Turn your engine off and stay at home. So I did as I was told for the first time in my life, and I had 3 days of work at home. It was great. But on day 4, there's an emergency meeting of the Grint family, because it has become apparent after an audit of the entire house, there is less than 6 months' food left, and starvation haunts the corridors of power. There are children wailing about the approach of death and the absence of cornflakes. So the powers that be in my house decide that someone should go looking for fresh food, and I am the chosen one. I am chosen to go to Woodstock. My nearest town looks like this. I don't even know what I'm looking for, but as I drive out, my wife says, if you find a buffalo, tether it to the car and drag it back. Thanks, dear. I'll keep an eye out for a buffalo. I get to Woodstock. There have been as yet no buffaloes. I'm walking down the main street looking for some shops. Eventually, I come across 2 shopkeepers who are in their doorways complaining about the absence of customers. which is explained by the absence of the Oxfordshire snowplough team. Now, as I drive in and put the local radio on, the local radio says the Oxfordshire snowplough team is stuck in snow in Oxford and won't be coming out. So you're on your own. So I relate the information to these two people, and they both said, that's not our problem, mate. And I said, I don't think you heard what I just told you. It actually is your problem. And they said, listen, mate, we pay the local taxes. It's not our job to clear the snow. It's the local authority job to clear the snow. When they clear the snow, then we'll get some customers. And I said, I don't think you heard what I just told you, mate. Why don't you get your snow shovels out and shovel your own snow away? I'm then told where to put both snow shovels simultaneously. So I had some more helpful advice. I said, listen, mate, I've lived in Germany for a long time, and in Germany, it's a legal requirement to clear the snow from your drive. And the conversation turns distinctly colder. The first shopkeeper said, how come the Germans can get through the snow and the Brits can't? And the second one said, how come your English is so good for a German? And the first one said, do you know about 1965 and who won the World Cup? Against who? And I said, well, technically you're wrong on both counts, because it was 1966, and it should be against whom, not against who, because it's a subject, not an object. And the second one said, since we're on the Second World War, and I left at that point. And thought to myself, on reflection, this is a nice example of a wicked problem. You cannot solve people's wicked problems for them. You have to give them back to the people with a problem. That doesn't make you popular. But your job isn't to be popular. Your job is to get people to address their own wicked problems, whatever they might be. In Ronnie Heifetz's terms, leadership is about disappointing people at a rate they can manage. This actually isn't a German thing. This was Edward I, who was King of England in 1285 when he issues the Statute of Winchester. This is a legal response to an upsurge in robberies on the King's Highway. What's happening is hedges and woods are growing closer to the main roads and people are being robbed. From this point onwards, if a robbery occurs because the robbers have been hiding in your hedge, you're responsible for the robbery. So hitherto, robbery was somebody else's problem. Now it's your problem. In 2003, the Fire Brigade Union went on strike, and it coincided with a reduction in fires. Now, I'm assuming fire officers don't normally set fire to houses to practice putting them out, which is what explains why we get a reduction. I'm assuming this is what's happening. It's a Friday night, so some of you in the local bar having your normal 10 litres of lager. You then drag yourself home, put the chip pan on, get into your cozy chair, fall asleep, wake up, your house is on fire, call the fire brigade. The fire brigade come and put your house out. But from this point, there is no fire brigade. So you change your pattern of behavior. It's a Friday night, so you're still in the local bar, but you only have 9 litres of lager, not 10. And you buy the chips from the shop because you know there is nobody coming to save you. There's something in this about the number of safety nets people need. If you give them too many safety nets, they avoid personal responsibility. If you don't give them enough, there's a catastrophe coming their way. You have to get the numbers right. So I want to capture that way of thinking about leadership through this man, Michael Labrashoff, who ran this American destroyer between 97 and 99. When he picks up the ship in 97, it's the worst performing ship in the Pacific Fleet on every criteria they measure. He doesn't have a reputation for knowing how to turn ailing ships around. It's just his turn. He has no idea how to fix any of the problems on the ship. But he has a process, and that's to ask the crew. And the book is about how the crew turn the ship around, not how he does, but how the crew do. I'll just give you one example. The crew have to wear something called standard issue foul weather jackets. These are big, uncomfortable jackets. They cost $150 each. There's no flotation device built in, and the crew hate them. They're complaining to him one day, and he says, stop complaining and see if you can find a designer on board that can design something cheaper and better. And if they can, we get that made up and you can wear that instead. That's what they do. So the new design costs $90, has the name of the ship across the back, has a built-in flotation device, and is very comfortable. The crew love their new jackets. But the first time they come back into San Diego Harbor with their new jackets on, he gets a phone call from the senior officer in the harbor saying, your men have been spied wearing non-standard issue foul weather jackets. And he says, yeah, they're great, aren't they, sir? And the senior officer says, no, they're not great, they're illegal. Get them out of their illegal jackets, back into their legal jackets now, before you dock. And Abrashoff refuses. And at the end of a very long conversation, Abrashoff says, I'm now going to refuse a legitimate order. So you can court-martial me. You can do this on 2 different grounds. 1, I've just saved you half the clothing budget on this ship this year. And 2, I've just improved morale by 100%. And on that basis, I'm happy for you to court-martial me. And the senior officer says, I'll think about that. Doesn't court-martial him. And then this ship wins a Spokane Trophy for the best prepared ship in the US Pacific Fleet. It's gone from the worst to the best in 2 years with him not knowing a single answer to any of the problems on the ship. But he has a process. Ask the crew. So I want to capture that way of thinking about leadership through regarding it as a wheelwright. This is a story about the Chinese Emperor Liao Bang in the 3rd century BCE, consolidated China, and to the celebrations came lots of guests. One of them couldn't understand why he was the emperor, because he wasn't a noble, nor did he appear to be an expert in anything. So he asked Chen Sen, the military expert, why is this man the emperor? And Chen said, well, what determines the strength of a wheel? And the guest said, the strength of the spokes. And Chen responded, 2 sets of spokes of identical strength do not necessarily make wheels of identical strength. The strength is also affected by the spaces between the spokes, and determining the spaces is the true art of the wheelwright. In other words, you don't actually need to be an expert to be successful facing wicked problems. You just have to surround yourselves with people who are experts and give them some space to work. Okay, so let's just summarize and then we'll finish. So I'm suggesting, again, this is a heuristic, in terms of these 3 decision styles, command, management, and leadership, and these 3 criteria, space, time, and problem. Command's normally about tactical space, management's about operational space, and leadership's about strategic space. The time you've got for a decision. Command is short-term, management medium-term, and leadership long-term. And the kind of problem you're facing. Command's about critical problems, management's about tame problems, and leadership's about wicked problems. And the last thing is this. Etzioni, who work on compliance, and argue there are probably 3 reasons why people would follow you, which fits quite nicely with this typology. He talked about coercive institutions and coercive compliance. He was working in a prison and argued if you work in a prison, you could normally force people there to follow you. I'm suggesting you can force them to follow you if they think there's a crisis and you are the commander with the answer in your head and you're doing it for the collective good. Most of us live here, what he called calculative compliance. People will follow you here, not because you're forcing them, but because it's their job to follow you. It's therefore rational for them to comply. It fits with tame problems and the role of management. Just occasionally he talked about normative compliance. People will follow you here, not because you're forcing them, not because it's their job to follow you, but because they want to. This is the most difficult one to do, which is why it's restricted to wicked problems and the role of leadership, as I'm defining it. And we'll finish with this. So you're the decision maker inside here, and the further you go up the vertical axis, the more uncertain you are about what to do about the problem. And the further you go on the horizontal axis, the more collaboration you require. So when you're facing a critical problem, act as the commander, provide the answer. You get access to coercion or physical power. It's what Joseph Nye calls hard power, if you know Joseph's work. Most of us live in the blue box most of the time, facing tame problems. Act as a manager, organize a process. You get access to calculative or rational compliance. Just occasionally you get a wicked problem for which you can't know what to do. If you do, it isn't a wicked problem. Your job, therefore, is to act as a leader, as I've defined it, ask appropriate questions, and engage in high levels of normative or emotional collaboration, what Joe calls soft power. I'll finish with this. Some problems are so complex you have to be highly intelligent and well-informed just to be undecided about them.